working our 3D poinsettia flowers first, because remember, we are going to submerge them in water and they still need to dry before we can assemble them on our shoe. So while they are drying, we will go on and prepare the rest of our shoe. Now, at this point, you have decided whether you are going to make a red poinsettia or a gold or whatever color you would like to make for your Christmas poinsettia espadrille shoes. If you are going to use the red, you will be using the red satin, red organza, and some water-soluble stabilizer. If you are working like me on the gold one, we are working with a cream color organza, our water solvy in between, and it's like a champagne satin shiny side up that I've hooped. Now what you need to decide is if you want to make a fabric non-see-through flower or a see-through flower. If you would only use 2 layers of organza, you would still be able to see right through the flower, and that will be an organza flower. For those of you who have been at the organza technique, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the organza technique webinar yet, I think it's a great idea to go and watch that webinar at your earliest convenience, because there's a lot of great information in the organza webinar. So in the organza webinar, we have taught you that you've got 2 options, either to make a see-through flower or a non-see-through flower. If you are going to make a non-see-through fabric flower, you're simply going to substitute one of the layers of organza with some fabric. And we are using satin fabric because satin works well with a heat burning tool. Remember, you can't use 100% cotton with the organza technique, because 100% cotton won't burn well with the heat burning tool. You need something that can melt. So that's why we are using satin, and it's working great. Now let's talk about the thread that we are going to use. Remember, the organza technique tells you that you need to use rayon thread whenever you are using the heat burning tool called the Burnsie. Now, although this is 100% true, and you will always like with the red one, you are definitely going to use the rayon thread to make it easier for you, because polyester thread will melt very easily. But there's a little adjustment that you can do to this technique, and that is when you are using metallic threads. Now metallic is polyester, which is supposed to melt very easily, but because metallic thread is a harder thread, it's a little bit more durable to heat, although we are still going to be very, very cautious when we are going to do this to not burn the edges. But we'll get to that part, and I'll show you how to work with metallic thread like a professional without burning it. So we're going to get started, and I've hooped my cream organza at the top, water solvy in between, and the champagne gold or satin shiny side up. For our bobbin thread, you do not want to take metallic thread. Now remember the rule of 3D organza. It says your bobbin thread needs to match the top thread, because else, if this was gold and I would use white at the back, it'll be white at the bottom, gold at the top. But you cannot use the metallic thread as bobbin thread. You need to use rayon thread for your bobbin, and go for the color that matches closest to what the project you are doing. So this is the closest color that I took for the bobbin thread, because it kind of like matches with the green inside of the flower, and with the gold itself you can barely see it there. Can you see that at the back? So this was a good color. It's a green yellowish goldish color that I've used for the bobbin thread, and this is rayon thread. Now I want to go over to the machine and show you something about working with metallic thread. Going to the information, this little page, I'm working on the wonderful Baby Lock Solaris, and I'm going to go into the information page, and I'm going to go to page number 8. Now you will see that we've got like 3 layers with the flower, we first need to prepare the first 2 layers, and then we will hoop a new hoop and do our bottom layer and assemble the 2 top layers onto this one. But the hoop size I'm going to work with is 6¼ inch by 10¼ inch. And you just want to make sure whatever hoop size you want to work on. If you're going to make some more flowers because you're making a lot of shoes, you can use any hoop size you would like to do to make the layers that you need for your flowers. But I'm working on this one. Now, the speed of the machine is very, very important. You would like to set the speed of your machine down to no faster than 500 stitches per minute. So make sure that you bring it down to 500 stitches per minute. Metallic is the same rule as rayon thread that we are saying. Rayon can take heat, but rayon can't take speed. Same goes for metallic. Metallic do not appreciate speed. That's why we're going to slow down the machine. Now, usually people will tell you never to bother with the tension of your machine because it's factory set, which is true in most cases. But I want to tell you that whenever you are working with metallic thread, go into your tension setting, which is at 00 at the moment, and I want you to make it -2 to help the metallic thread from stitch easier, because that is a looser thread tension. So I've selected my hoop size, I'm down to 500 stitches per minute, and my tension is to -2. Just remember that once you're done and you go on to your shoe, and I will remember you later that we are going to set it back to the factory setting of the 00s. And I'm going to click on OK. One last thing before we can get started, I want to talk about the metallic thread.
Begin net 'n bietjie weer daai sin oor.
One last thing. One last thing on metallic thread is that metallic is absolutely beautiful, but it needs that little bit of extra help, like not stitching it too fast, lowering the tension on the machine. What is wonderful about the Babylock Solaris is this fantastic thread stand at the back. If you don't have one of these, try to use a separate stand so that your thread can flow from the top down into the machine instead of using metallic thread onto these spool holders. Alright, so you will see that I've decided to use the right one, which means my thread needs to go through the 2 eyelets at the top, right? Instead of just to the left side where it's going through the first one. Going through 2 eyes helps the metallic thread to not tangle because it gives it more space to unwind. So that's just a great tip for working with metallic thread. Work on the right side one so it goes through both of the eyelets at the top, and that's going to help you with that. So let's get started now to prepare the designs we need, and we'll go back to the screen to see what are we going to embroider. I'm going to go into the embroidery screen of my Babylock Solaris, and I've already selected the hoop size that I want to use, and I've got my designs loaded on the USB, and this is the designs that you are going to download in order to make these. Now remember, we've got 2 patterns. We've got one for the slip-on shoe, and we've got one for the full shoe. We'll talk later about that, but at first we are just going to do the 3D poinsettia. So I'm going to select this little pocket on my machine, and I'm going to select the USB flash drive, and you will see that there's 3 layers of the poinsettia. For now I need the medium and the small, so I'm starting by selecting the medium size poinsettia, and I'm going to click on set, and I'm just going to move it a little bit, right? And now I'm going to say add, because I want to add the small layer. So I'm going to click on the pocket again, go onto my USB, and I'm just selecting my Poinsettia small pattern, and I'll click on set, and I'm just going to scoot it down a bit, and now you can see I've got a medium layer and a small layer, and we are ready to go into the embroidery screen. Now all that we're going to do is we are going to embroider this. We're using the polyester metallic thread. My bobbin thread is matching the color of my flower, and it's rayon thread. I'm using a 80/12 needle. So let's get started embroidering our first layers for the poinsettia. We are done embroidering our medium and our small layers of our poinsettia, and next what we need to do is once again hoop our hoop with our organza on top, water solvi in between, and our satin shiny side up hoop there, because we need to do the bottom layer of our poinsettia, and we are now going to assemble the small and the medium on top of the large. But I went ahead and already did a second set, because we will need another medium and a small for our second flower to do our pair of shoes. So at this stage now you can simply unhoop your medium and your small, and you're going to rehoop with your organza, water solvi and the satin. And what we're going to do before we get started, or you can do it while you're already starting the machine, I just want to show you this. You are simply going to cut out your layers, and what you want to do is you want to go close to the satin stitches, alright, but not too close. Remember, you're still going to trim it later on once we're done. We just want to cut out the organza, water solvi and the satin. So I'm just going to go on, keep on cutting my layers until I've cut them out. Okay, now that I've cut out my medium and my small layer, just roughly cut out, not into the satin stitches, because we're still going to trim them later on. But what we need to do now is we need to hoop another hoop with our satin at the bottom, water solvi in between, and our organza on top. And since we are going to make the bottom layer of the flower, right, and we are going to assemble the medium and the small layer on top of the flower within the hoop, so this is enough space to make your two flowers for your pair of shoes. So I'm going to select two bottom layers inside of this hoop. To do that, I'm going to go into my embroidery screen, and I'm going to select the pocket, my USB flash drive, and now I'm going to select my Poinsettia large. I'm going to click on set, and since they are exactly the same thing, you can either add another one, or you can go into your embroidery screen, click on edit, right, and now you can duplicate your design. So I've duplicated my two large layers, and I can simply go into the embroidery screen. Now at first they are just going to stitch out with the metallic thread, just like looks like this one. And once we are going to assemble our poinsettia, you will see that we are now using other colors like the yellow and the green. There's a little bit of gold as well. You can look on your color chart, but that is the threads we are going to use to assemble our layers on our base layer. But let's go and make our first two base layers so we can do the assembly. Okay, now you can see that this one is already assembled, and this is for our two flowers for our shoes. And I'm going to show you now how to assemble it onto the large layer. Now we already cut out our medium and our small, and we are going to assemble it layer by layer. The easiest way to do that is to take your hoop out of the machine, so you can work with your hoop dismantled from the machine. So you're going to take a pin, and then right in the middle, just put in your little pin right in the middle, right? And then you're going to take your pin and put it right in the middle of your bottom layer. So you're just going to stick the pin right in the middle. And now you can see you can move your medium layer until you are happy that it's like in an alternate position. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to take a piece of painter's tape. You can use any tape you want. You just kind of like want to secure it in place so that it holds it, because remember, it's very important that you remove your pin. So you can see my painter's tape is holding my medium layer in place, and I'm going to take it back to the machine, and it's going to assemble my middle layer on the bottom one. Once again, I take my hoop from the machine, and I'm just removing my painter's tape a bit so I can put up my small layer. Same thing, take my pin and right in the middle of my small layer, I'm going to take my pin and insert it through the middle and the large right in the middle. And then you can kind of like move it around until you're happy that it's like that in an alternate position. And once again, I'm just going to take my tape and I'm going to pin both the middle and the large, or the medium, down to the large, so that it just holds it while it can stitch my small layer onto the medium and the large layer. Going back to the machine, and we're going to stitch. And now it's secured, and you can remove your pieces of tape. And now we're going to start with the detail of the inside part of the poinsettia. I'm going to go gold, green, yellow. Now we are stitching the green color. I'm using rayon thread. Our last color is going to be yellow. And we are done with our 2 poinsettia flowers, and we are going to cut them out. We are going to soak them in some water, and I'll show you exactly how to prepare them for your shoes. Let's prepare our 3D poinsettia. We have used the organza technique. We've substituted our 1 layer of the organza with the satin, and that's going to give us the non-see-through flower. So I'm going to unhoop my workpiece. We've already stitched them out, and all you want to do now is you want to cut out your flower. So I'm just going to go close to the edges but not into the stitch line. You don't want to cut into your satin stitch. So I'm just going to go and cut my flowers out. I've cut out my first flower, and we're still going to trim it with the heat burning tool, but we just cut away the excess of the water solvi, the organza, and of course our satin. I'm going to cut out my next flower, and then we will submerge it to water. We've cut out our 2 poinsettia flowers, and now I'm going to submerge them into the water. Now the water is a strong warm water because the water soluble stabilizer dissolves better in hotter water. Always take a container and add your embroideries so that the water solvent dissolves within the bowl, and then you throw the water outside. Don't put this through your zinc system, because there is a possibility that if you are using it a lot, that it might clog up your drain system. Alright, so just a note on that. One of the reasons why we're not using our heat burning tool right now is we first want the excess solvent to dissolve, right? Because that gives you a better finish than trying to use the heat burning tool on the water solvent. So all I do is I'm just going to submerge it in water, right? We don't want to rinse all of the water solvent out completely, because we still want a nice and sturdy flower that we can shape. So I'm basically just submerging it in the water. Leave it there for a few seconds. You don't want to rinse it all out. And I've got a towel over here, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to just pat first the excess water. Just pat it out a bit, right? Just let it absorb the water. Alright, and now what we're going to do is we are going to kind of like, while it's drying, you can shape your flowers a bit. Alright, but leave it a bit so that it first start to dry, and then you can come and you can just kind of like shape it so it looks like a beautiful poinsettia flower. The more you shape it, the better it's going to look on your shoe. So leave it to dry, and once it's dried and shaped, we will come back and use the heat burning tool, trimming it, and I'll teach you the tips on using the heat burning tool, and we're going to make the perfect flowers for our shoe. Our 3D poinsettias are now dry, and it's time for us to trim away the excess fabric of the satin and the organza. The solvay has been dissolved and it's dry, so we can trim it now. But before we trim it, I just quickly want to give you another tip. So this is my pieces of leftover from making my flowers. What I want you to always do is take your water soluble stabilizer, like these pieces, alright? Keep them somewhere in a bag, because let's say you have rinsed out too many of the water solvay inside of your flower, and now you want to put some stiffness back to the flower. You can always take some of your water soluble stabilizer. You can put it like in a spray bottle with a little bit of water, and it dissolves, and it basically becomes a glue spray. And then you can always spray some of the glue and reshape it. You know, you can simply wet your flower again, respray it, and that'll give it beautiful stiffness. So don't throw this away. This is really great to keep it if you want to use it again. So we are going to use our heat burning tool called the Poinsettia, my favorite heat burning tool. That was hot. Right, always be cautious. So this is my little stand that it's going to stand on, alright? And this fits very neatly. I wanted to show it to you, but it's hot, alright? So just be cautious whenever you're using a heat burning tool. It is very, very hot, and I want you always to be cautious and always to unplug it if you're not using it. So we're going to start using our heat burning tool, and what I want you to do is take like one leaf like that, alright? And I don't want you to try and just go fast and do it. And what I actually want to tell you is we're going to do a tap dance, alright? Instead of, like, I know you are thinking of taking the heat burning tool, facing it down, and that you want to go close to the stitches. Now remember, we are using the polyester metallic thread, which is, you need to be more cautious than doing the rayon thread. So I want to show you something. Instead of using the burning tool facing down, and you kind of like can't control the heat, you can still do it that way, but I want to show you something to turn it the other side facing up, because then you've got more control. You are taking your flower to the heat burning tool instead of your heat burning tool to your flower. And what I want you to do is just to tap. That's all you're going to do, right? The smoke you see coming from it is basically the synthetic fabrics melting. Then another important thing, if you are using your heat burning tool, if you bought a Poinsettia from us for the first time, you will see that it will make some smoke because there's certain metallic impurities it needs to burn off coming from the manufacturer. So you just don't want to worry about that. The second time you use it, it'll be all great. So what we're going to do is basically just a tap dance. You just tap, tap, tap. If you go onto a larger part, like over there, right, what you can do is also with the shaft, you can just tap dance. Tap, 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 tap. So you are going to do a tap dance. So instead of doing it this way and forcing the burning tool into your stitches and it might burn them, turn it the other way around and start doing a tap dance with your design. So, and this is all you're going to do, is go leaf by leaf and just simply going to melt away any of the excess fabrics. So I'm going to tap it all the way around until I'm done, and we've done a great job with this. So while I'm tapping, I'll show you the end result just now. I'm almost done with my first flower, and to make it easier, kind of like start, I just want to confirm some tips over here. You can open it up like layer by layer, and then you just like work on one petal and then on the other one, and if you've completed the first, go on to the second one, kind of like separate it as you go, right? The main thing about what you're doing, you're not trying to burn your flower, you are just trying to seal those little pieces of fiber of the fabric and the organza. You want to seal it into your thread, protecting it so it won't unravel. So you're not trying to burn it, you're just basically trying to seal it. So I've done everything except the last one, because I kind of like want to confirm it with you. So can you see what I do? I fold them and I just work on one leaf at a time, like that. And I'm still going to do the tap dance. I'm just tap, 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 tap. I'm just sealing away. I know people think they need to like melt it and burn it. That's not what we do. We don't want any black edges. If you don't want black edges, do the tap dance. You just want to tap those little pieces. Can you see those fibers? Let me just go under the eye over there. You see those fibers? You just want to tap them. Alright? Just make sure to tap them, melt away the excess, and you've done a great job. So now that we have completed our flower, it's ready to go onto our shoe. We are going to do the embroidery part of our shoe. We are done with our flower, and we are going to make the shoe and do the little leaf applique on it. But we've got two different patterns. This is our shoe pattern, and this is our slip-on shoe. So you can decide which one you are going to make. It's two completely different patterns. This one is called the slip-on, and if you choose this one, you are going to do the directions for this one. But I'm going to demonstrate on a full shoe. So if you are using a large hoop, you are going to make it in a front part and into one back part. But if you are using a small hoop, you will have one front panel and your back panel is going to be in two parts. We are working in the 9.5 by 14 inch hoop, and the fabrics I'm going to use is, our shoe will be made out of a piece of duck, and I've got this beautiful cream color. All my fabrics are pre-washed and ironed, so they look great. And then I've got a piece of the lining, and it's 100% cotton lining I'm going to use. And then for my appliques, to make for the leaves, I've got a nice green shimmery bridal satin. So that's my fabrics I'm going to use. If you are working on the black and red shoe, you will have whatever lining you're using, some black canvas or duck, and then the leaves stays the same, this beautiful green. Also, our hoop is hooped with a piece of perforated cutaway, and this is going to be the base where we're going to work on top of this. So let's get started by changing our settings on our machine back. Remember, we are still working on with the metallic thread. We're still working with the metallic thread on here, so I'm keeping the settings for working with metallic thread, which is the -2 on the tension and the 500 speed as well. I need to change my hoop to a bigger hoop, and I'm just going to select the 9.5 by 14 inch hoop. I'm still at the 500 stitches per minute. My tension is still at -2 because I'm still working with my gold metallic thread. Now it's time for us to bring in our designs, and I'm selecting my little pocket, and I'm going to work on my front panels first. So I'm opening my USB flash drive, and you can see that we've got a left and a right front panel. You will see that there's a big one back panel, and then there's half the back panels. When you are using the large hoop, you will use the complete large back panel. But if you are using a smaller hoop, you are going to prepare your back panel into two smaller pieces. So for the front panels that we need, there's a left and a right. I'm going to select left, right, and I'm going to click on set, and I'm just going to move it a little bit up, and now I'm going to add. I can't duplicate that one. Remember, it's a different one. It's a right and a left. It means they are different. I'm selecting the right panel. I'm going to click on set, and I'm going to take it far from the other one. You don't want to put it up too close like this, because you need to cut a seam allowance around your panel. So make sure you space it out so that there's enough space for the seam allowance around your panel. And then all we do, we are going to click on the embroidery screen, and it's going to stitch out the first outline to show us where to place our fabric for covering our guideline. So I'm going to run the outline of the first panel. I'm taking my beautiful cream piece of duck, and you want to make sure that you've got the right side up, alright? And what you want to do is inside of the hoop, you're going to place it over your outline that you just stitched so that it covers completely, and you are making sure that your second panel will have enough fabric covering. And once you know that both of your panels will fit onto your canvas fabric, I'm going to go on to the second step, running the details of my front panel. You can now see that we have stitched the details with the metallic thread on top of the duck, and I've did the first applique of the leaves on my first panel, and I'm now going to show you how to do the applique on top of your panel. Just remember, we are using green rayon thread now, so you are going to change the settings on your machine, the tension back to 0, and you can notch the speed up a bit so you can stitch faster. So the first step is going to be the outline of the leaves, so we know where to do the placement for the satin. I'm now going to take my square of satin fabric right side up, and I'm going to cover my outline of my applique. But I just want to say something before I do that. Usually when I do applique, I prefer to put a piece of fusible webbing at the back, but in this case we're not going to do it because it's a very small area we're covering, and secondly it's going to be behind the flower. So I'm not going to do that now. So it's only a block of the satin, right side up. I'm covering my outline, just let it lay flat, and I'm running my machine to tack down the satin. satin fabric has been tacked down, and now we need to trim away the excess satin fabric. I'm taking my applique scissors and just right next to the stitch line, not into the stitch line, I'm just trimming the excess fabric. With my satin trim, I will put it back into the machine, and it's going to run a zigzag stitch around my satin to secure it even more before going on to the satin stitch. The zigzag stitches has neatly secured our fabric of our applique, and next I'm running the satin stitches to do the details of the leaf. Our next step will be to put the lining on top of our panels. We have done our two panels with a nice applique, and what we need to do now is take our piece of lining, and you will cut it big enough to cover your two panels. Now this is my cotton lining. I'm going to take it right side down, right? So I'll take it right side down, and I'm going to cover it over my fabric, let it lay nice and flat, and we're ready to run our outline that's going to tack down our lining. Our one panel has been stitched with the tack down, and you can see the little opening over there, but we still need to stitch our top panel's lining tack down, and what we need to do now is just go manually to our top panel up until the part where the lining is going to stitch, and I'm going to run the tack down for my top panel's lining. We have lined our two front panels, and you can see the openings. That is where we are going to turn them around. At this part, you are basically done with your two front panels, and you can unhoop your perforated cutaway, and we are going to hoop our hoop again with perforated cutaway and get started on our back panels. We are now going to work on our back panel, and we are using the large hoop, so our back panel is all in one piece. If you are using a smaller hoop, your panel will be in two parts with a nice neat joint at the back. You will follow your step-by-step photo illustrated instructions showing you how you will join your two parts to make one big panel. But we're going to stitch a large panel, and I already got my fabrics ready. I've got my piece of cotton lining, and I've got my piece of cream duck. So let's get our embroidery designs ready to start stitching. So on the embroidery screen, of my Solaris, and I'm going to select my design from my USB. Now here you can see nicely that there's the two larger panels, and this is the two half panels for the smaller hoops. I'm going to select the first back panel. So we need to flip our design, and I'm flipping it 90 degrees, and I'm going to click on set, and I'm just going to move it so that I can fit the next one in. So what I do now is I'm going to add, I'm selecting the second panel. I will also need to rotate and flip it 90 degrees. Oh, I need to set first. Click on set, and then I'm going to scoot it out. Now you want to scoot it out so it's still within your embroidery field, but that there's enough space around it so that you have a seam allowance once you start preparing your panels. So that looks good, and I'm going to go into the embroidery screen, and it's first going to run the outline of hoop by hoop with perforated cutaway. I'm still using the metallic thread. Now remember, between the metallic thread and the green thread that I used for the applique, I've changed the settings on my machine. I've lowered the speed again using the metallic thread. I've taken my tension of my machine to -2, and I'm ready to start stitching using the metallic thread again. So first it's going to run the outline of our panel so we can do the placement for the duck. I'm now taking my piece of duck, make sure that the right side is up, and you want to cover your outline that you've stitched, and you just make sure that there's enough seam allowance around your pattern. And then I've got enough fabric on this side for my second panel. So all we need to do now is run our details of our panel. We have stitched out our two back panels, and it's time to do the lining. And all you're going to do is take your lining right side down, and you're simply going to cover your stitched panels. Make sure it's nice and flat on top, and you're going to do the last step of tacking down your lining onto your back panel. You will need to manually go from your right panel to the left panel in order to do the last step. So let's run the machine for our last step of the right panel. I'm going to go back to our first panel and just manually go to the last step and do the tack down for the left panel. panels are lined, and you can see that there's like a little opening here at the bottom, and that's where we will turn it around when we are preparing our panels in the next step. But I quickly want to say something about the panels. If you look at the panels, and you will see that at the bottom of where the opening is, it looks like it's got a curve, while at the top part it's a little bit more straight. So if you want to know when you are working with your panel which side is the top part, like which side is the top of the shoe and which part goes onto the shoe, you can see that the straighter line is definitely at the top and that the curved part is going onto your sole. And so you will easily know the part that goes onto the sole is where the opening is. Alright, so where the curve is onto the sole, and this is the top of your panel. That's just an easy way to know, so that you don't use it the wrong side onto your shoe. Let's go on to the next step, preparing our panels and finish up our shoe. Let's talk about patch bond, our magical product we are using to help make us, or to help our shoes to be more sturdy. So what we're doing with the patch bond is we are fusing our lining and our outer fabric together, giving you a really nice sturdy shoe that's not as floppy as a normal fabric shoe would be. So what is patch bond? Patch bond is an interfusible webbing, and the one we are using is industrial grade. Personally, I think it's the best on the market. We use it for so many other things, like when we are making patches and our iron-on appliques, but this is the magic product in our shoes. So inside of your folder you will have PDF templates, and it will look, this one has been cut out, but you will select the size that you want and you can print out as many as you like. But you will need to cut 2 pieces of the heel patch bond, 2 pieces of the toe patch bond, and you will need 2 pieces of the heel support part. What you also need to cut is you need to cut 2 pieces of the duck, the little block of duck or canvas. This is like an extra part that we're going to put at the heel to make it really nice and sturdy. So you're going to cut 2 of each pieces, and then you are ready to start ironing it onto your panels. Now I've got my front panel and my back panel. I've already cut my pieces of patch bond, and I've got my little piece of duck for the heel support. I've got one front panel, I've got one back panel, and then my heel support patch bond. You will notice that the patch bond is cut smaller than your actual panel. Can you see that? Now, why is the patch bond not the full size of the panel? Why is it like smaller? Because patch bond, once fused the fabric together, right, it's so thick it's almost like a canvas. So remember, we are going to stitch this onto the shoe, and if you need to go with a needle right through patch bond, it's impossible. It becomes like a thick canvas. So that is why we need to leave the spaces basically around the shoe where our needle needs to insert, and where we are stitching our front panel onto the back panel. Wherever we need to go through with a needle, we can't have the patch bond in there. So therefore the patch bond is smaller than the actual panel. Now this is my front part, and this goes onto the sole, and this is the part that I'm going to stitch onto the back panel. So I need to stitch right through this, and over here I need to stitch around the edges with the waxed espadrille thread. So you can actually measure, right? You can measure 5/8 of an inch, and around this side 3/8 of an inch. So that looks pretty good to me. You are from the lining side, right? And I'm just going to take my iron, and you want to take your iron, it should be really hot. Patch Bond loves heat. If you've got a heat press, that's even better. So I'm just starting to iron on my Patch Bond. Right, that's a pretty good job. Now what you need to do now is put your ironed Patch Bond panel aside and let it cool completely. You will feel that it's very hot. But if you're going to try and pull off your piece of paper right now, the patch bond's going to come off because it needs to cool down. The other thing is that if it's not completely cooled down, there's no way that you can turn it around without the glue sticking together. So put it aside and let it cool down completely. I'm going to iron my patch bond onto my back panel. Now remember, we did say that where the opening is the part in the curved one that goes onto the sole, and the more straighter part here is at the top one. So take that into consideration, right? It's here where the opening is where we are going to go with the waxed espadrille thread. We need to go through our fabric, right? So you can't have the patch bond like this, alright? You need to have it more to the top, and it needs to be 3/8 of an inch. Let's just measure that. Right, that looks good. So you can see it can be closer to the top, but here it needs to, where it needs to go onto, that's good. Alright, good. So we're going to sew the waxed espadrille thread through there. There's enough space for the needle to go through, and I'm going to iron this on now using a very hot iron. If you've got a press, you can press it, just making sure everywhere I apply even heat on the patch bond, and that's good. But remember, we've got this extra little piece over here, and this is our canvas heel insert that we are going to insert over here, alright? And you need to iron a piece of patch bond onto your canvas, alright? So I'm going to do this, just iron it on. Alright, I'm just going to let it cool a bit, because we will need to pull off the paper. Now while we wait for that one to cool a bit, you need to determine exactly where the middle is of your panel, so that we know where to put our heel canvas part. So I'm just putting my stitched corners right on top of each other, and that's going to give me a good indication, right, where the middle is. And all I do now is I'm just going to take a pin, and I'm just going to pin over here, and that'll show me exactly where the middle is. Alright, you just want to kind of like know where the middle is, and I'm going to make sure of this side right there. Open it up and just insert my little pin over here. Alright, now you can see where the middle of your panel is. It's the easiest way to do it that way, alright? But now it's also important to determine, now to bend it, it's difficult to bend it like that, so I already pull off my patch bond. You see how nice and glossy this is? It's sticky. And what I do is not on the glue side, on the side that don't have the glue, I just fold it like that, just a little bit. And I'm taking my water-soluble pen and I'm just going to mark the middle of my piece of canvas, right? Remember the glue is on that side. And now what you want to do is you want to put your heel support. Let me turn it this other side around, alright, so you can see better. Right. So remember, this is the part where it's going to be at the top, right, of your heel. Think about it. This is the heel, and this is the part that goes onto the shoe, right? So it's like this. Okay. And now I want to basically place my little heel support over there, right, so that my needles or my pins line up. Let me just make that one. See, it looks a little bit skew. No, it's pretty good. I just need to line it up. Alright, so what you need to do is you need to take off your paper part. Just going to pull off the paper. Just pull out the needles a little bit. And pull it off. And then all you do is you just want to line up. This can go right to the top, alright, because you're not going to go with any needle through, and you need that support right at the back. So you're simply going to place your canvas heel support there, and remember, here's no glue over here. Here is glue and here is glue. So what you want to do now, you want to take your iron and just with the tip, just fuse it on. You don't need a lot of heat because it's already kind of like sticking together on that side because it's glue on glue now. Alright, so I'm just gently fusing that. In the middle it's okay because there's no patch bond. You don't want the patch bond to get onto your iron, alright? It's very difficult to take that off. So there you can see we've got our heel support fused in on our back panel. Here is the glue and we're ready to turn it around, but we need to let it cool down a bit. So I'm going to go on to my front panel that's already been cooled, right, and you can gently pull off the paper part of the patch bond. Now you can see, look how glossy that is. Can you see that? That's the beautiful industrial grade patch bond, which is like a film of glue on. So what we need to do now is turn our panel around, and I'm going to go gently from this side. And remember, the glue is going to try and stick together, so you kind of like want to not work fast, but you want to be aware that it can stick together and already try to help it to not stick together. So this is where you can use this alternative wooden tool of ours, and it's just to help you to turn it around. So you're just gonna get a start in here, and once it starts turning, it's really not that difficult, right? Then it goes, and then it stops sticking if you can keep your fingers in there. And then all I do is I'm just going to take my little turning tool. Don't push too hard so that you push right through your stitch line. You kind of want to be gentle but firm, right? Can you see? And then if you've got a very nice, or even like a crochet hook, it'll work great to pick up those ends. Alright, I'm going to do that just now, but we've turned it around, and you need to like insert a crochet hook over there to push out, to really push out your end over there. Same goes for your back panel. You need to turn it around now. So over here the wooden tool works very well because it's nice and long, and if it's cooled down, it's really not that hard to turn it around. But don't try and do this while it's hot, because then the glue wants to stick and it makes it really difficult to do that. Alright, see? Going to turn around the other side. Okay. This is my back panel, my front panel. I need to neaten up my points, make sure that it's pulled out. And the next thing you need to do as well is you need to close up your openings over here. Now I just fold it like that, right? You can see it like that. And what works really easy is taking some of these quilters clippies, just so that you can hold it in place over there. And you just line up your lining with your front. Right. And now you can hand stitch this together, or you can use the top stitching of your machine, whatever you want to do. Same goes for the back panel. Right, one was easy, and I'm just going to clip it together so it holds it in place so that I can stitch it closed. Right, I'm going to quickly stitch this part closed, and I'm going to neaten up my little corners, and then we are going to fuse our panels so that the lining side, you can see the lining is still loose from the front part, right? You can see it's loose, so we need to iron that on so that it becomes like one with our front part. So I'm quickly going to stitch that up, and then we can iron it together. I've closed up the openings of my panels, and now I need to fuse my front fabric to the lining, and you always want to start from the lining side. Alright, so all I'm going to do is take the iron, and I'm going to fuse my patch bond from the lining side, so it becomes a really neat, flat, beautiful panel. And once you fuse that, you can turn it around, and now apply some heat from the front panel. Can you see it becomes flat and really neat? Right. Same goes for the front panel. I'm going to go from the lining side, start fusing it. Fusing it from the lining side, turning it around, and then from the front I want to go onto the satin stitches too much, just around it. Right, just make sure, and now you can see that it's fused. It's like my front part and my back part is this beautiful one panel, and it's starting to look like a shoe. We need to go on to the next step, where we're going to stitch our front panel onto the back panel, and to do that we need to do some measurements. Alright, so we're going to measure where our back panel needs to go onto the front panel, and then we're going to stitch it with the machine. So you will turn your front part so that the lining is facing up. And from the side, what you want to do is you want to measure 5/8 of an inch. Now you might not be able to see so nicely on my fabric. If you are using a darker fabric, simply use a white marker or some dressmaker's chalk. But what you want to do is you want to measure 5/8 of an inch on your side. Alright, I'm going to do the same over here. I'm just connecting the dots so I can see my 5/8 of an inch on my fabric side. And now remember, the curved part goes at the bottom, the flat part goes on the top. And this is how it needs to go onto the shoe. So with that said, I know I need to place my panel on the 5/8 of an inch. And I pick it up from this side. You want to check it from this side to make sure the front panel is not overlapping, right? And it's on the 5/8 of an inch. So I just want to make sure from this side that it's lining up. Yes, over there. Okay. And once you know that it's, you need to just determine that part at the bottom first, and then the next one, just make sure that it's on the 5/8 of an inch, pin down over there. And then you can go on to this side, same thing. You just want to make sure that it's on the 5/8 inch line, that it's not overlapping too much over here. Just want to hold it over there. Yeah, that's good. I'm pinning it, just making double sure from the inside that I'm on the correct. Right, that's good. And now I'm ready to go to my sewing machine and sew this front panel onto the back panel. I'm in the sewing mode of the Babylock Solaris, and I've got foot N on the machine. Now the reason why I like foot N is because it's got a little groove right in the middle, and you can actually very easily guide through the plastic part on the foot. So I prefer to use foot N, but you can use J or whatever foot you would like to use or prefer. One very important thing about stitching the front part onto the back part is you need to use cotton thread, like a 30 weight cotton. You cannot use embroidery thread to try and put the front panel onto the back panel, because once you put your foot in, it'll break loose. So we need the stronger cotton, so please, no embroidery thread for this part. I've got my bobbin thread and my top thread. My top thread is a cotton 30 weight, and I'm going to show you one thing about this foot that I'm using. So the needle position is right in the middle at the moment, and if you look on the machine you will see that it's manually right in the middle. If you did not know this, once you are in the embroidery mode of the Solaris, this switch is for speeding. If you want to go slower or faster, you can manually set the speed here. But once you are in the sewing mode, this is actually your needle position, so you can manually move it to which side you want it. At this moment it's right in the middle, but what I would like it to do is have a 2mm stitch to the left. So I need to move my needle position. Now if you look on the screen, you will see that the needle position is right in the middle on 3.5. So I need to manually, I'm just going to go manually over here, and I'm going to move it 2mm up until 1.5. So that's going to give me a 2mm stitch. So let's get started. I want you to take your shoe so that the front part is on the left, and what you need to do is basically just flip your shoe like that so it can lay flat and you can easily stitch on it. And all you need to do now is you are going to make sure that the little groove is guiding on the edge of your panel, right? So very slowly just start to guide alright. Just want to remove that pin, still laying flat, and all I'm doing is just guiding my little groove on the edge of my panel, and that's going to give me a 2mm stitch. And when I get to where my front part goes onto the panel, you can stop there and go back a few stitches and then go forward. So all you need to do is guide it all the way to the other side. And at the end, just going to go back a few stitches and cut. So we've got our first stitch line over here. Now the next what you do is you're going to guide your little groove on your first stitch line, and that's going to give us our second stitch line. Just guiding on the groove, taking your time, guiding the groove on the stitch line, and it'll be a neat job. We've secured our front part onto, you can see it's two very neat stitch lines over there, and it's beautifully secured. So let's go do the fun part of stitching our top part onto our soles. Alright, we are almost ready to put our shoe part onto our soles, but before we do that, we need to put our flower on our shoe. Well, there's different ways that you could do it, but I want you to do what you would like to do, what's best for you, alright? But you need to put it on already before we are starting to put the shoe onto the sole, because let's say you want to sew it on like I'm going to do it, then it's going to be difficult if the shoe is already on the sole and now you want to put your flower. Unless you want to glue it on, then you can do it afterwards. You can also use like press studs or little snaps, but then you will already have to put the snap on your leaf part and on your flower so that you can just snap it on afterwards. But I prefer to sew it on, because with snaps you can have that little bit of a wobble, and with sewing it on it's just kind of like looks more natural, but that's what you would like to do. It doesn't mean you have to do that, all right? So we are now ready to stitch our top part onto our espadrille soles. Now a question you might have is, when I've got my soles, how will I know which panel goes onto which shoe? Let me show you that. So remember, we've got the little opening that you stitched up, alright? So the opening will always be on the inside part of your shoe. So in other words, this panel of mine, if I hold it like this, my opening is on the right side. So that'll mean if the right side is on the inside, it's on the left shoe. So if you had this panel, the opening would be on the left side of the panel, which means it's for your right shoe. So I've got my left foot over here. I've got a pair of nice thick sole espadrille sew my soles, and of course at sew my soles we've got the little toe flower, which is great. It helps you so that the toes don't form into the fabric. So we're going to get started on preparing our panel to put it on the shoe, and I'm going to teach you all the tips and techniques how to do that. But before we go on, I want to show you something. So you've got the option, right, today, whether you would like to make a shoe, meaning you've got a front panel and you've got a back panel, or you can make the slip-on variation. It depends. Now you might think that, oh, that's fine, I'm just going to do the front panel and then it's going to be a slip-on. We did do a variation on the pattern simply to make it fit better. I've tested this, I walked for a few days, I changed it many times up until we got the exact correct one for the slip-on. So make sure that you understand the slip-on is a different pattern than the full shoe one. Let me show you what the difference is. So this is a front panel, just like this one, of our full shoe pattern. But this one is a slip-on variation, and I did it on the black so that you can see the difference once we are done. And this is going to get the red poinsettia on it, but this is for the slip-on one. So I want you to see the difference. If I put the panel of the full shoe on top of the panel of the slip-on, you will see that it's basically 3/8 of an inch, right, longer than your normal panel. So in other words, it just gives you that little bit, 3/8 of an inch, so that it won't fall off your foot, making it perfect. So you will be printing out a different patch bond that's going to be slightly larger than for a normal panel, but that'll be all in the instructions. So just so that you can see, there is a difference between the panel of the slip-on and the normal shoe pattern. I'm going to later on show you a variation on how you will make the stitches if it's only a slip-on on the shoe, but let's get started with our full shoe right away. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to turn your shoe around, and you are going to line up your inner panels exactly on top of each other, alright? You basically want to find the half of the shoe, and you kind of like want to fold it so that it's exactly in half. These clips are really handy. They don't come with the kits, but make sure that you've got some clips, alright? And that'll help you so much. So it helps me to determine exactly where the middle of my shoe is, all folded in half, alright? Next, what I want to do is I want to take some cotton thread, and I'm taking a 30 weight cotton thread because we need to stitch our shoe's front part onto, or we need to sew it onto the back of the toe flower. And to do that, I'm using the same color that I'm using. It's like a natural color, and it's going to hide perfectly between the jute. So make sure that you use the same color as your shoe. So if you're making a black shoe, you're going to use some black cotton. Alright, so what I want you to do now is you're basically going to take your half shoe, and I've got my needle with my thread. This is a needle that comes in your pack. You will see that there's like 4 different needles on a piece of felt inside of your kit, and this is like, it's upholstery needles, so you will find 4 different ones that you can use. I'm going to use this one, and I'm just going to insert. I did make a little knot at the back of my cotton, and I'm just inserted it right in the middle of the front of my shoe, and you just want to gently pull it through so that the knot don't pull right through. And what you want to do now is I'm going to let it lay down over there, and I'm simply going to take my shoe, and now right in the middle at the bottom of my toe flower, I'm just going to go through, and I'm going to slide it on. Right, can you see that? So basically when I pull it now, it's pulling it right into the middle. And what I do now is I take my thumb, and I'm going to go from the back side, holding it at the back, right, like that. And I'm simply going to go from the top of the toe flower, making small stitches and hiding it between the jute. I'm just going to go in a row, right, up until the top, and then I'm going to go from this side to this side and the other side, and then I'm going to stitch it row by row, stitching it so that there's 3 layers of. Now that you've determined the middle of you can take these clips off, alright, because they kind of get very heavy. So I want you just to hold your thumb at the back of your toe flower, holding it in place, and you're going to start stitching row by row, sewing your toe flower onto your panel. So I've went ahead and I've stitched row by row, 3 rows over there, and you can see here at the top I went close to the top of the toe flower and make sure that it's really neatly sewed on there, because you don't want it to open up over there, right, like it looks like you've kicked it open. So once you're done, if you completely sew on your toe flower, you can end it off coming up at the top and simply doing that, and you're going to snip it off. And now you can see that your toe flower is neatly sewed onto your shoe. Alright, so next what I'm doing is I'm going to take my panels again, lining them up, go back like that, right, and I'm going to put my clips back on, right, because that's going to help me to determine exactly where the middle of my shoe is. Now I want to do a very important step before we're gonna start to pin our shoe onto our sole. Is at the back, right at the back of the heel. I'm going to add a very important step called the anchor stitch, and the anchor stitch is a really important part. If I can anchor it at the back of my shoe, and I can anchor it to the front of my shoe, then I've got the stability that the shoe is not moving from one side to the other one while I'm going to stitch. Alright, so quickly I'm going to show you how to do the anchor stitch. I've used a piece of blue waxed espadrille thread just so that you can see nicely. So what you do is you're going to determine exactly where the middle of your sole is, and I'm just going to slide in where I'm happy it's the middle, right? And I'm just pulling my piece of double string. There's no knot, and you kind of just like want to leave it like that. And what I do now is I take my shoe, which is right in the middle, and I'm just going to slide my needle, right? And what you do then is you're going to pull it through, and while it's still lying like that, I already go in a second time, just coming up, alright? Going back into the shoe for a second time, like that. And 2 times is enough, and then I pull it very close to that, and that's going to give me a neat anchor stitch. You see that it's holding at the back, and now I can open up my shoe and start pinning because it's right at the back. It's been held on. So I've got the anchor stitch at the back, I've got my toe flower sewed in the front, and now I can start pinning. I'm so glad last night that I actually thought about something I want to show you, and we will talk about this for better fitment, but I want to show you this because you can determine how deep you want to stitch, right? We will talk about that, a deeper stitch length or a shorter stitch length on the fabric, whether it's going to make your shoe smaller or bigger, alright? But it's a guessing game whether you're going to say, well, should I make it a deeper stitch length or a shorter stitch length? What should I do? Take the guessing game away, and I'm going to show you. So I'm wearing a size 10, and I've got a very narrow foot, right? So I did take one of the medium wedge soles, which is a good size for me. It fits perfectly. I've made myself some shoes on this, and what I did is I did put my shoe on my foot on my shoe, and I've basically just traced it with my water soluble pen so that you can see, you know, where my toes are going on side. So when I look at this, this is a pretty good fit for my shoe. So in other words, I'm just going to do the 1/4 of an inch stitch on the fabric, and it's going to fit really well. But sometimes someone will put on the shoe and then their foot is way smaller. By tracing your foot on the sole, that'll give you the indication where you need to go deeper or where you need to go right on the edge. Alright, so I want to show you this. I took a size 11 just to show you. If it's too big, then you will know how to go in deeper. These soles run rather bigger than smaller. So if you are a half size, like let's say you are a 7.5, a lot of people take the size 8, where you actually should take the size 7, and because it's fabric it will stretch and it will be perfect. But people are scared that shoes are going to be too small. Let me tell you, rather take 7 than taking the 8. But let's say you did take the 8, then it's great to take your water soluble pen, trace your foot on your sole, and that's going to show you, alright, I need to make my stitch length deeper. Does that make sense? So if you know you need to make it deeper, you can plan on that. So instead of guessing, should I go deeper or should I go right to the edge, trace your shoe on this, and you can always just wipe it with a cloth. Don't put water on your soles, but just wipe it with a cloth, and you can take off the water soluble pen. Alright, so that's just a great tip for getting fitment better. But we're going to pin down our shoe now. We've already did our anchor stitch. We are anchored in the front, and what I do is I always start at the back. Alright, because you don't want too much room. You would rather want, if there's extra fabric, to be right in the middle over here than there is to have at the back or even the toes. So you always start at the back so that you can know exactly what to do. So let's start to pin it down. You're going to pin it now from the back, and you kind of like want to just flap your fabric so that it's on the edge, and then you just simply pin it. It's really not hard to pin it. Kind of like just go around the form of your shoe. And I go about up until here, right over here, and then I like to start to go from the front. Like I already said, if there's any extra fabric, you kind of like want it in the middle where your foot don't stretch. If there's too many movement on the front and the back to have extra fabric, then it will be too big. I'm just going from the front, pinning it down. This one fits very good. You can see there I'm just pulling it in. It goes in the curve of the shoe, fitting really well. This one is pinning down very easily. It's great. I'm going to go from the other side, going from my heel side again, simply pinning it down. And the anchor stitch is so fantastic, holding it in place so that the fabric won't move. Going around here, pinning my shoe down, and when I'm over here, you want to go from the front part, just making sure, pin it down right on the edge, fabric on the edge of your sole. Stay on the curve of the shoe, it'll guide you. Okay, this is a perfect fit. And now you can see how great the shoe is lined up. It's like exactly perfect. And that's because of the anchor stitch. Because else, if you don't have the anchor stitch, you can start moving, and later on it can look like the one side is higher than the other. With our way we're doing it, it's gonna be perfect. So let's get started on stitching using our espadrille thread. Now I would say that you should use the natural color of the espadrille thread, right? I'm going to show it to you now. Just want to grab onto this very long piece of my wax thread. But for demonstration purposes, I did use a green color of the wax thread, right? Really grabbing it on over here. So you can see I'm going to use a green thread simply because it's hard to see white on or cream on cream color. You might not be able to see. So I thought I'm going to do it in the green. That's definitely not what I would do, but you could do it. It should still look beautiful. It depends. Some people like to use wax thread in different colors. The variegated one I like a lot using with certain fabrics, but you can see this one that we've used a cream color, which is what I would prefer. So I'm just doing it in the green so that you can see exactly what I'm going to do. To complete a pair of shoes where you're going to stitch on the edge, right, like if it fits well, going 1/4 of an inch onto the fabric basically, right, then you will need 5 yards of wax espadrille thread to go around a shoe without needing to join another piece of thread. But what was interesting, I actually learned this from one of the clients that did the deeper stitch length. Then she was telling me that the 5 yards was not enough. So if you're gonna do the deeper stitch length, like if you are trying to make your shoe fit better, like I was showing you when you see that you need to stitch deeper, go for 6.5 to 7 yards of the wax thread in order to stitch right around. Personally, I prefer to do it all in one piece. It is a little bit more difficult, but you can stop at any time, rest a bit and try again, and you can help with your hands. It's such a wonderful process of doing this, and it's so forgiving. It's really not hard to do it, and the more you do it, the more fun it will become. And I will promise you, once you start making shoes, this will not be the last pair of shoes you are going to make. So but you could work in smaller pieces of the wax thread so that it makes it easier for you, but then you will have to join it. So I've got my waxed espadrille thread. We've got 32 different colors. I'm demonstrating on an apple green just to show you, and I've already did 5 yards, and I did like make a little knot. All right, so forgive me if I go out of the screen. It's hard to show you 5 yards, but I'm going to try my best. All right, let me just take some extra things. Other things you can use to help you a bit is, of course, pliers. Awl is very helpful if you want to make a little hole, but the clips, I'll show you how the clip can help you as well. So I'm going to start on this side where my shoe, where the double part of my front panel onto the back panel is over there, and I'm just going to start on right off the left of my double piece over there, right? So I'm starting over there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the inside. If you open up the shoe like this, you can see that there's like layers over there. So all I'm going to do is I'm basically going to go from the inside, and I'm just going to come up over there where I want to come up, right? I did show you there's the thicker part. I want to go a little bit, 1/4 of an inch from there, and I'm going to come out. And what you want to do now is, you can see it's from the inside in between those two layers, and I'm just going to help my piece, going to guide it like that, helping it. And then over here where my knot is, you will see that I'm going to hide the knot, pulling it into the shoe, and I just hide it like over there. Alright, so it's perfectly hiding between the jute, and it's out on this side. So what I do now is I'm going to take this thread and pull it up, and I'm going to hold it with my thumb. And now I'm going to do a blanket stitch, which is really easy to do. So I'm just going to start coming up right next to my double layers. So I'm going to go into the sole and come up right next to my double layer over there. And when I come up, I'm going to take my piece of string, put it around my needle for my first blanket stitch, and all I'll do is I'm going to pull it through, and there's going to be my first stitch. But now I want you to see something. Can you see that I've got one stitch over there that is straight, and then I've got the other one that is like a little bit skew? Don't worry about that. That one is going to pull up later once we finish off. So all you need to do is go around one stitch at a time, doing blanket stitch. So I simply insert, and like over here, this is probably your hardest stitch over there where the double layers is. You can take your pliers, or you can take your clips, and that clip's going to help you. Give it a little push, can you see that? And it becomes really easy. If it's giving you a hard time, you can still use the pliers, pulling it through. And I'm just doing my little blanket stitch. The rest of the stitches becomes more easily. I'm gonna keep on going one after the other, just doing the blanket stitch. I'm gonna go a little bit faster now, and I'm gonna meet you at the toe flower to tell you what you should do at the toe flower, but I'm just going to continue doing blanket stitch up until the toe flower. Okay, now that I'm near to the toe flower, just want to show you something. You can always take your hand if it starts dangling, and you can just run it in between your wax thread, and that'll untangle it if it's going to tangle a little bit, alright? Kind of like unwind it like that. Stop at any time to unwind and get them back. And also be cautious that your wax thread don't caught up onto other pins over there. So now that we are here at our toe flower, you can see that I kind of like need to go with an angle, and I'm just going to go with a little angle from this side, right? Blanket stitch, and then I'm on to my toe flower. Now at the toe flower, what you don't want to do at the toe flower is you don't want to stitch right through your fabric, alright? You're kind of like just going to stay on top of it. Really easy to do because it's not hard to do that. I want to show it to you. So you're just going to go through your layer of the jute, but you are basically sliding underneath the jute, so you're basically on top of your fabric. You don't go right through. Why don't you go right through? Because this is 2 layers of wax thread, right? And if you're going to stitch right through your fabric, the wax thread is going to be on top of your toes, and that's going to be uncomfortable for your toes. So on top of the toe flower, it's basically only for the show. It looks nice to stitch the blanket stitch on there, but you're not going to stitch it right through. So it's really easy at the toe flower. You're just going to do a decorative blanket stitch, sliding it in underneath the toe flower, doing your blanket stitch, and it's really easy to do. So when you get to the anchor stitch, right, you're already at the back here. All you need to do is take your scissors and you're going to clip it, and you're going to pull it out, because the job of the anchor stitch is done. And I think the anchor stitch has done an incredible job. And you can simply pull it out, and you're going to continue to do your stitch, and I'll meet you on the other side to where we are going to end off our shoe. Just keep on doing blanket stitch. We are now near the end and I've got like 1 or 2 stitches of my blanket stitch left. You can see I've got, there's that skew stitch over there. So I'm going to stitch like 2 more stitches. Just going in, coming up, doing my blanket stitch. And I'm going to do 1 more stitch before I'm right like next to the stitch that is a little bit skew. I'm stitching another stitch. And now you can see I'm over here where this one is like skew. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to put it through underneath that skew stitch over there. Alright, and I'm just going to take my thread and I'm going to pull it up. Can you see it? how neatly it pulled it up, right? And then I'm going to do another stitch just in between there because it looks like we need to do another stitch. Just coming up, doing the blanket stitch. And now for me to end off, all you need to do is you're going to go from behind the last stitch that you've made over there, right? So you're just going to go right behind that stitch through the fabric, coming up this side of the sole, alright? So everything over there is perfect now, but now you still got this piece of string. What you do now is right next to it, like a small stitch right next to that one. All you want to do is stick, you are literally going inside of your sole now. So you're going to dive into your sole and you want to come up in the middle of your sole. So can you see that? Here it comes up. It's like diving into the sole and then you're going to come up for fresh air. So you're just going to dive in and you're going to come up, and now you're right in the middle of this shoe. You simply snip off, and if there's any pieces of your wax thread, you can simply hide it within the jute, and you can now start forming your shoe because you are done. And you've done a great job stitching your shoe. Another thing you can do if you're want to have a really perfect shoe, you can like take your measuring tape and you can take your water soluble pencil and you can on top exactly decide where you want to stitch it if you really want to do a neat job, or if you want to stitch in deeper and you want to trace that so that you know where you want to stitch. That's also something you can do to make it perfect. But we've done a great job. Green is not my preferred color to stitch with this beautiful shoe, but it's great for the camera purposes. And next what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the variation one. If you're going to make a slip-on version, how you would go about to stitch this one onto a sole. If you have decided that you want to make a slip-on shoe, right, like this one, remember that I already told you that the pattern for the slip-on is not the same front panel that we used for the full shoe, alright? Remember that when making the slip-on. The front panel is different. I already show you that there's like 3/8 of an inch deeper instep for you, alright? So I've already went and I already sewed my toe flower onto my shoe. So we're just going to get started with the part where I'm going to pin it down. And this is the part where you would take your red poinsettia and decide whether you want to sew it on or you want to glue it on or use some snaps. Whatever you want to use, you can do it. I'm not going to put the flower on right now. We're going to start right from the front and we're simply going to pin our slip-on shoe down. Right. So just right on the edge of your sole, you are going to pin down your fabric, laying nice and flat. You kind of want to see, because now the pattern is a little bit longer, right? So you're going to go over this curve and into, so try and keep within the curve. Just pin it down all the way. Pull your fabric so it's right on the edge and follow the curve of the shoe. And on the other side you're just going to do exactly the same. Even if it looks funny now, right, if it don't look right, just make sure that you pin down the fabric right on the edge of your sole, the fabric lying flat. You will see it will form beautifully once we start stitching it. Just keep on pinning right on the edge, and I keep in the shape of my sole. always start on the inside part of the shoe. You can see I've pinned it down. And what's important here is that you need to, let me just see over there, right, you can see it's lying flat. That's the important part. It needs to lie flat, all the way flat, like over there. All right, so what you want to do now is you want to anchor it on the one side that you're not starting. So where we had the anchor stitch at the back, you want to anchor it here. So otherwise, if you don't anchor it immediately, once we start stitching, it's going to anchor from this side. But if you don't anchor it from that side, you start stitching here, the pins will pick up. That's what happened to me at first, and then I realized that I need to do the anchor stitch. So I'm going to start from the inside part, but I'm going to, on the outside part, I'm just going to do my favorite thing, and that is an anchor stitch. So I'm going to go through the sole, right, and I'm going to go right into the point of my shoe over there. And you can use some pliers over here if you need a little bit help. All right, just pull it through, and I'm gonna keep a nice long piece of string there. I'm gonna go for a second one, just going back into the sole, take my pliers, simply come up through the fabric, right, and I'm going to pull it through, and then just make sure it's secure. So there it is, my anchor stitch on the side in the blue color. You leave that over there. This is just helping you not to pick up your pins once you start stitching. So I already sewed on my toe flower. You can see it's nice and flat over there. I've used the black thread simply because I'm using my black soles, and I've taken my upholstery needle, my waxed espadrille thread, and I took 3.5 yards for doing this. Alright, so what you want to do now is you're going to start from the inside part, but you're going to start right next to your shoe. There's the shoe point, and there's really nothing to this. It's exactly the same. The main parts that you need to do is just to how to start and how to finish. That's all that's different, and it's not even different. It's just that I want you to know exactly how to do it, because you don't want it to be uncomfortable for your feet. So right next to this, I'm gonna go into the sole, and I'm gonna come up just underneath. Can you see that? It's right next to it. So I'm going to go into the sole without the fabric over here, hiding my knot inside over there. Can you see it? Just going to leave it so you can actually see it. So I'm not near the fabric now, I'm next to the fabric. And what I'm doing now is I'm pulling up my first piece of I'm pulling up my thread over there, and what I'm doing now is I'm going to make one stitch that's also before my fabric, before I go onto the fabric, because remember that skew stitch on the other shoe, that skew stitch I wanted to just grab onto there, right? So I'm going to go from the sole side and right next to it without going through my fabric. I'm still not on the fabric now. I'm going to make my first blanket stitch so it's off the fabric, it's not onto the fabric yet. Alright, and I'm going to pull it. Now you can see that I've basically got my first stitch there, and it's still not, you can see I can pick it up there. And now my first stitch that I'm going to do is going to be the same that I would, but now I'm going to go through my fabric. And if it's difficult for you to go through that thick part of the point over there, alright, you can just get a little bit help. And I'm doing my blanket stitch, and you will now see why I did it that way, making a stitch before the time. And I'm going to pull it. What happens now is I'm just pulling up that stitch and kind of like helping it to go onto the fabric, and that's really going to hold down your stitch over there, and it's like helping it to keep it down, because you don't want this point to stand up straight, because else it might hurt the inside of your foot. You want it to lay flat. And then all you do is you're going to go the next stitch and you're basically done there. Just going to go blanket stitch by blanket stitch. So all that's different is that you're first going to do a stitch that's not onto the fabric, and then it's going to help you to anchor that point down lying flat. And I will keep on doing my blanket stitch same as I would with my full shoe. I'm going to go over my toe flower just like I would with this shoe part, not stitching right through it. So I'm going to go a little bit faster now. I'll meet you at the toe flower and we'll just confirm the toe flower. When you get to the toe flower, once again, it's just for decorative purposes. It's only for the show. You want to go through underneath the toe flower and simply stitch it for the show. Little blanket stitch on top, not going right through the fabric because you don't want the double wax thread to be on top of your toes. And when you're on the other side, you're just going to go like with an angle from the sole side into the fabric, and you will continue doing your blanket stitch, and I'll show you how to end off at the end. So now that I'm near my anchor stitch, you can simply take your scissors and you can snip it off, and now you can pull off because it won't lift up anymore, and we just need to finish up the stitches. So I've got like 2 more stitches before I need to secure the sharp point. So I'm doing 2 more blanket stitches over here. Right. And now when I get to the end, what is important is you don't want this harder little point to make your to be in the way so that that your foot will go. So it's very important that you kind of like catch onto it. So I want to go right underneath it, and this will be a little bit hard. So you want to take your pliers, right, and take your time. So I'm going to make sure that I slip right onto or right through my point, right, and I'm still going to do a blanket stitch. But now you will see there's like a little part that's still open over there, so you need to go further. Remember the other one, we were next to it. Now again we are like next to that one, so you're going to go further and you're going to make a next one, and that will also help you to pull down that part. And all you need to do now, same as you would end off with the others, you're going to go from behind that last stitch into your sole on this side. Gonna pull really hard, and that's gonna hold that really neatly down. Can you see that? Can you see how it's holding that point down with the stitch that went further onto the sole? And you are from this side in the sole, and all you do, same as you would, is go right next to it, diving into the sole, go deep, and you come up in the middle of the sole. You can use your pliers again, and you can pull it, and then you can just simply snip it off. And if there's anything to hide, you can just hide it in between the layers of the jute. And look at your shoe now. You've made a slip-on version. And can you see that the important thing about this is that your thread should hold on to those pieces, because those pieces can get hard, and if you don't stitch them down, they will go underneath your foot and that'll hurt you. So make sure that those points are stitched outwards, right? Because that's the magical thing. They should be held by the fabric over there, going in an outwards position, not be able to go underneath your foot, because now there's nothing that can hurt you on the sides. You can simply shape your shoe. It's looking very pretty. And remember, you already put on this one, and there goes your slip-on version for stitching them. So there's really not much a difference. It's just make sure that the two thick parts over here is showing outwards and that the threads are holding them down. Then you've got the perfect slip-on shoe. We have done a great job stitching our full shoe, stitching our slip-on, and I know you can't wait to get started now.